Joe Biden had documents in 4 or 5 different places. He is still under investigation.
He volunteered their presence. Donald Trump didn't.
And unlike President Trump, he did not have the authority to declassify documents. He got documents when he was a senator, Henry. He got documents from a SCIF, which is called a private secured area, where you're neither supposed to take documents in or out somehow, some way. Then Senator Biden ended up with documents he never should have had. That's under investigation. Why it's taking so long is beyond me.
So Donald Trump pleaded not guilty to all 4, quotes, election lies, the charges that were put against him during his appearance at a Washington, D.C. courthouse. Prosecutors did not ask for Mr. Trump to be detained, but he was warned of consequences if he were to communicate about the facts of the case. The former president is accused of fueling the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol by sowing distrust in the 2020 election. The indictment also says he pressured election officials to change results in a failed attempt to cling on to power. Mr. Trump said on the airport tarmac after court that the case is a persecution of a political opponent to hurt his chance of re-election in 2024. Well, let's talk to Larry Elder, who is a talk show host and a 2024 Republican presidential contender. Larry, hello and welcome to Times Radio.
Henry, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
What do you make of what you've seen today?
Well, not too surprisingly, as a Republican who supported Donald Trump in 2016 and in 2020, and will do so again in 2024, if, Henry, I'm not the party nominee, I agree with everything he says. I believe it is persecution. I believe it is unfair. I believe that there's a 2-tier judicial system. For example, the Bidens have been accused of graft at the highest level. There isn't even a special counsel that the Department of Justice has appointed in order to investigate the allegations against Joe Biden and his son Hunter and his brother and other family members. Completely unfair. Hillary Clinton was accused of having an unsecured server in her basement, a clear violation of the Espionage Act. Yet the FBI head found her not worthy of charging because he said she lacked the intent.
But hang on, Larry, let's double back a little bit to late 2016. It was the actions of the then FBI head that helped Donald Trump over the line, did it not? By saying that there had been investigation into Hillary Clinton, and she still blames that action for costing her the election. So people were scrutinizing her, and it damaged her campaign. We're talking about Donald J. Trump today and the 4 serious charges.
I'm sorry, Henry. I don't accept that analysis. Okay. Hillary says lots of things caused her not to win, including sexism. But the bottom line is the head of the FBI said that Hillary lacked the intent to violate the Espionage Act. The specific part of the act that she's alleged to violate, Henry, did not require intent. She got a pass. Also, Hillary and the DNC paid for the so-called Steele dossier. The Federal Election Commission fined them for calling that a campaign contribution. Donald Trump called the payments to his former lover or whatever, the hush payments to her, all those legal expenses. And he's now under criminal investigation, criminal charges by the Manhattan District Attorney.
But Larry, I mean, aren't we talking chalk and cheese here?
It's a double standard.
Aren't the indictments that Donald Trump is facing, the charges he's facing, of a whole different league, a whole different level from the ones Hillary Clinton was accused of? Okay, private email server, and people went to town on that, and it helped to damage her in the eyes of the American public. We're talking about Donald Trump having classified documents in Mar-a-Lago, in the bin, in a shower, all kinds of crazy stuff. You couldn't make it up. And now we're talking about something very serious. There is evidence, it would appear, enough to bring forward this indictment for some of the most serious things you can imagine a president doing, basically trying to stop the peaceful transfer of power. Isn't this proof that the American system, the separation of powers, is actually working? You're a nation of laws, separation of powers. It's working. Nobody is a king in the United States, and nobody is above the law. You should be saying this is good.
You mentioned the documents that Donald Trump has been indicted for. Joe Biden had documents in 4 or 5 different places. He is still under investigation.
He volunteered their presence. Donald Trump didn't.
And unlike President Trump, he did not have the authority to declassify documents. He got documents when he was a senator, Henry. He got documents from a SCIF, which is called a private secured area, where you're neither supposed to take documents in or out somehow, some way. Then Senator Biden ended up with documents he never should have had. That's under investigation. Why it's taking so long is beyond me. Now, as to these charges regarding what happened on January 6th, here's what's really important. There's a 45-page indictment. And if you read the indictment, all throughout the indictment, the special counsel praises Vice President Mike Pence for resisting the pressure put on him by Donald Trump to refuse to certify electors from certain states. He basically makes Mike Pence out to be a hero who held up the Constitution and prevented this unlawful alleged takeover of power by Donald Trump. On the other hand, a few weeks ago, the same Vice President Mike Pence, Henry, was on CNN. And while he said, I disagree with President Trump, I believe President Trump acted recklessly, he says, I am not convinced he did anything illegal. Secondly, the whole reason for the arguments that Donald Trump made is something called the Electoral Count Act, which was passed in 1880. It's been the same law now for 140 years. And Donald Trump argued a novel theory, and that theory is that the vice president had the power to prevent certain electors from being elected. Now, I happen
But
to
Larry,
disagree.
who else agrees with that analysis? You called it novel. You're being kind. Who else, a sensible, sane judge who isn't party pre, who else would agree with that analysis?
Well, obviously, the lawyers who advised Donald Trump believe in that analysis.
Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, they themselves are facing charges.
Yeah, a couple of them are. We believe that Rudy Giuliani is co-conspirator number one. A guy named John Eastman, whom I've known for a long time, is co-conspirator number two. But this is what's important, Henry, and what I think a lot of people are missing. This interpretation of the Electoral Count Act, as I said before you interrupted me, was novel. On the other hand, in December of last year, Congress changed the law to change the wording to make it crystal clear that the theory that Donald Trump advanced could not be advanced. Now, if it was so crystal clear, why did Congress feel a need to change the law to clarify that what Donald Trump assumed was not valid?
I suppose the reason why they did it was because they couldn't believe that anybody in such a position of power would ever come forward with that analysis. And that's why they moved to stop it, to make sure that nobody would ever try and use that wriggle room again in the future. But enough of Donald Trump for now. I'm concerned about you, Larry. Larry, I'm concerned about you. You want to be president. Sorry, Larry. You want to be president of the United States. Why don't you set out why you should be the next president? Because surely you believe more in yourself than Donald Trump at this point.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And by the way, I need 40,000 individual donations to qualify for the first debate on August 23rd. You can do so by going to my website, larryelder.com. Obviously, if you're not an American, you can't contribute. I am running as an America First guy, a Make America Great Again guy, but I'm also running, Henry, to put forward some issues that I believe our side does not talk enough about. If at all. And number one, there is a real concern in America. To me, it's the number one domestic problem, the epidemic of fatherlessness. 70% of Black kids enter the world today in America without a father in the home married to the mother, up from 25% back in 1965. Now 25% of white kids do. And in my opinion, what we've done with our welfare state, the so-called war on poverty that a Democrat launched in the mid-60s, is to incentivize women to marry the government and incentivize men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. The numbers are clear. Even Barack Obama once cited these numbers, Henry. If you are raised without a father, you're 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. And nobody's talking about this.
But Larry, why do you think so many, you say African American, white American, Americans of all stripes, are not marrying before they have children? Are you really saying it's because women have decided, I'd rather the government be my husband than this man or that man? Isn't it something deeper about the way Americans live?
Well, I agree with you. It's more complicated than just one thing. By the way, I didn't say African American. You did. I'm an American.
You talk black. You talk about 70%. You said Black Americans.
Yeah, I didn't say African American.
Okay.
You did. I'm an American who is Black.
Okay.
Look at the trend lines. In 1965, 25% of Black kids entered the world without a father in the home married to the mother. Now it's 70%. 1965, 8% of white kids do. Now it is 25%, up threefold. If you look at the trend line on how much money we spent on so-called welfare programs and poverty, the lines parallel between those of the proliferation of kids being raised without a father and the amount of money that we spent. I believe there's a connection. So if you're asking me, do I believe that there is an economic incentive for the part of women to marry the government? Yes, I do.
Larry, the welfare state in the US, I know a little bit about it, not a huge amount, but I know far more about the welfare states in Europe, and they're more generous here than in the United States. But the rate of family breakdown in the States is worse than in most countries, I think. In Europe, how do you factor that? How do you understand that to be the case?
Well, Henry, let me just put it this way. 60% of all the shootings, the robberies, and the homicides in America are committed by Black people. Half of all the homicide victims in America are Black. A young Black man aged 10 to 43 is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white man, same demographic. If not for the breakdown of the family, how in the world, Henry, do you explain that? I'd like to hear your explanation.
Okay, well, let me say this. Countries which have really appalling gaps between rich and poor, a really gross Gini coefficient, as they call it. So South Africa, Nigeria, US tend to be the most violent. Countries where the government has stepped back and say, we're not really involved. It's all about you work really, really hard and you'll get yourself out of poverty. Countries where access to guns proliferate, they tend to be the most violent countries in the world.
Nice try.
It's not a try, it's facts, man.
Nice try. During the Great Depression, 50% of Black Americans were unemployed. You did not find this level of criminality. I'm sorry. Something's going on.
But you didn't find this same level of criminality among whites either, did you? It's about the way Americans live today in the 21st century. It's all about the American dream, but the American dream for many has become a nightmare because they're told you can achieve this if you work really hard. There's people working 2 and 3 jobs at minimum wage. They don't see their children. As a result, the children are raising themselves. There's easy access to weapons. And I tell you, people are really struggling in some of those states, not just in the urban areas, but also in the rural areas. And as a result, the opioid epidemic is crazy in the States. It's because people are deeply unhappy. And in many cases, the government has said, you get on with it. Surely that's part of it, isn't it? They're not their brother's keeper. You talk about one nation under God, but you walk on by. You walk on by. That's the problem. You're supposed to be your brother or sister's keeper.
Wow. Nigerian American families, Henry, in America have a higher household income than do white American families do. How do you explain that?
I'll explain that very easily. I'll explain that very. I know a load of Nigerians in this country, in the States and elsewhere. They have come from a different culture, okay? They have come from Nigeria. Often the ones you get are the most educated, the ones from middle-class homes. And when they come to the States, they see how the land lies and the perspective is different. So they will go and grab it. It's just like over here, some of the kids who do the best in our schools in this country have come from recent immigrant backgrounds here in the UK. Same thing happens.
Chinese Americans have a higher household income in America than do white Americans. Japanese Americans, those who have been living here for generations, have a higher household income than do white Americans. Korean Americans, many of whom have lived here for generations, have a higher household income than do white Americans.
But you know what, Larry? You know what the difference is? The difference is it's the degree to which they integrate. It's the degree to which they integrate. If they integrate too much, Larry, if they integrate too much on the wrong kind of terms, they end up with the same kind of future as the average American. If they integrate on their terms, keep their culture, keep their identity, keep their language, they soar.
If America is as racist as you claim it is, how do you explain
Who mentioned racism?
The Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, Korean Americans do as well as they do? And the answer is very rarely do you find Japanese Americans, Korean Americans, and Chinese Americans having children outside of wedlock and embrace in education. The average Asian American does better than do white Americans on SATs and LSATs, standardized tests for college and standardized tests for law school. How do you explain that if America is as racist as you claim it is?
But Larry, I'm not the one who claimed America was racist. I was just talking about the analysis. So what would your prescription be? How would you get people to get together and stay together and get married before having children?
I think that every one of these kids who's being raised without a father needs to have a mentor. I liken it to a program called Alcoholics Anonymous, where recovering alcoholics have a sponsor. Some some person that they can call whenever they feel a need for advice. Every single one of these kids needs somebody like that. I'm part of the baby boomer generation, Henry. My generation is either retiring or about ready to retire. And a lot of us, I would like to say, are still pretty vigorous. They've raised children, they've nurtured grandchildren. They should step up, volunteer to be mentors. And I'm also urging us to be able to direct our tax dollars that go right now to Washington, D.C. for programs, to go to local organizations in your own neighborhood for programs that do this kind of mentoring. The monies being spent for welfare are being spent inefficiently by federal government, and they should be spent more efficiently by my being able to direct my own tax dollars towards organizations, often churches in my own neighborhoods, that are doing these often kind of door-to-door mentoring.
Larry, thank you very much. It's been a privilege and a pleasure to have you on Times Radio. Larry Elder, 2024 Republican presidential contender, live on Times Radio.